Welcome to part 4 of the Industrial Revolution. Now we're going to talk about the cascading effect. So previously I had set up the advancements in the cotton industry and how each item built upon the other, a cascading effect. This is going to continue, right? Eventually you're going to have these spinning jennies tied together into what were called mules, and then they're being powered by water wheels, right? So you're beginning to take the human factor out there. And then finally we're going to start looking at other forms of power supplies. Thomas Newcomen, for example, in 1712 is going to invent the atmospheric engine. The atmospheric engine is a pretty inefficient type of steam engine, right? A matter of fact, so much so it was only really ever used to pump water out of coal mines, right? But it is the first step, right? As this need for some kind of mechanical power increased, you're going to have James Watt in 1769. He's going to invent the steam engine, right? He's going to take the Newcomen engine and he's going to add a condenser to it to make it more efficient, and he's also going to create a circular rotation motion to it, again, to allow it to where, it's not like advancing one way and has to advance back. You now have something that's always rotating in a singular direction. This is going to be very pivotal for industrialization, right? And so now you can begin hooking up these flying jennies and these mules to the steam engine. Then this does a lot of things, right? In 1785, the textile manufacturers began applying these steam engines, and now they can build their factories away from water supplies, right? You don't have to have the fast-flowing streams to run the water wheels. You can be closer to your raw materials, making you more efficient. You can hook more and more of these mules to a steam engine than you ever could to a water wheel. Matter of fact, your only limitation is the amount of steam you can generate, the amount of pressure. And that was limited by the strength of the metal for the condensers, for the pressure tanks, right? The weaker, the stronger the metal, the more pressure. And so that means, of course, that the cascading effect, the next advancements that are going to come, are going to happen in metallurgy. Now, if we're talking metal before 1800, we're talking about iron, right? And to smelt iron, you needed to use charcoal. The problem was by the early 1700s in Great Britain, they didn't have a lot of access to forests anymore. They pretty much used all theirs up. And so charcoal was getting harder and harder to come by. Abraham Darby will address this in 1709 when he will figure out that if you preheat coal, it becomes a thing called coke, which you could use to separate iron from its ore. Then that separated iron could be pounded flat with hammers, and what you get out of this is what's called wrought iron, right? Now, wrought iron is stronger than how they were developing it before, but it still results in an iron that has varying thicknesses and is still pretty weak, right? So it has some limitations. In 1783, Henry Cort is going to invent the puddling and rolling process, right? You use coal to heat the iron until it's molten, and that allows you to cast it into molds or roll it out. This produces a stronger iron product that's more homogeneous, right? And it makes it easier to prefabricate materials as well because you can cast them, right? Finally, in 1856, Henry Bessemer figures out how to preheat iron and mix it with carbon to produce a thing called high-grade steel. Steel is exponentially stronger than just wrought iron. It's more flexible, and it's definitely more malleable and useful, right? And so again, the metallurgy needs this allows you to build the bigger and stronger pressure vessels you need for bigger and strong and more advanced steam engines. You see, we're cascading even further along. So as you can see, what we have here is a continuum cascading effect, right? Better metals mean better tools, mean stronger and cheaper cutlery. It means you can start casting rails for railroads, better steam engines. Better steam engines mean you start having railroads and and trains and steamships by the 1820s. More powerful pumps allow for deeper mines and getting more iron ore or tin or whatever. You also have more powerful motors to allow you to turn more spinning jennies and create larger factories. Factories begin organizing into towns. You begin to have the development of factory towns that are powered by steam engines, supplied with coal in the case of England from the North Midlands or Wales and Scotland, supplied with labor from the countryside, right? And their goods get transported out via railroads and steamships, right? You start to have the great entrepreneurs start to show up, right? For example, Sir Josiah Wedgwood, who was a China manufacturer, will begin to try and control every aspect of his production, from the raw materials to the showrooms and the shops in the major cities. What he's going to create is one of the first monopolies, right? This is a vertical monopoly where he controls every part of the process, from its rawest good to its finished product, right? You're going to see others that'll follow suit. On a global level, Britain becomes the manufacturer for the world and increasingly becomes the most and the wealthiest nation in the world, right? Factory owners made incredible profits, right? By 1820, one spinner could do the work of what 20 spinners could do prior to industrialization, okay? The consumer got a lot of cheap goods, right? Prices on things that had been expensive will go down because you can mass produce them now. Cotton, for example. I said before, it was 11 shillings per pound in 1784. By 1832, cotton was 1 shilling per pound, right? It's also going to lead to a large increase of urbanization, right? You're going to have urbanization of populations. They start moving into these factory towns. These factory towns become factory cities, right? So you have industrial centers in these, beginning in England and then eventually throughout Europe. The Industrial Revolution had many repercussions on nations and their economies, and you really see this in England. By 1815, Britain is the only really industrialized nation, but it became even wealthier as it continued to go forward, right? Great British cities began to develop in the North and the Midlands, like Manchester and Birmingham and Sheffield and Bradford, right? These industrialized cities became linked together through British railways, making it possible for easier shipment of raw materials and finished goods, right? Communication becomes key. In 1840, you're going to have the establishment of the British postal system, the penny post, right? Manufacturing also is going to link the wealth of Britain to the rest of the world using steamships. In the 1830s, Isambard Kingdom Brunel is going to develop a railway line called the Great Western Railway that's going to connect the city of London to the port city of Bristol. In 1838, he's going to launch a steamship called the Great Western, which is going to initiate regular steamship service from Bristol to New York City in the United States, right, connecting the two nations together. Also in 1838, Samuel Cunard is going to begin a steamship line with a group of investors called the Cunard Line, and they're going to begin service in 1840, regular steamships from this time Liverpool to New York City. If the Cunard Line sounds familiar to you, the Lusitania, which was sunk by a German U-boat in World War I in 1915, was a Cunard Line boat, right? The statistical data on the British Revolution is absolutely staggering, right? Between 1782 and 1852, rather, industrial production grew at 3 to 4% per year every single year, which is really phenomenal, especially at that time period. By 1830, Britain produced 70% of the world's coal supply and 50% of the world's iron and cotton cloth, right? By 1850, the per capita income in Britain was 32.6 pounds per year, right? To put that in perspective, in France at the same time, which was starting to roll in its own industrial revolution, it was 21.1 pounds per year. And in Central Europe, which was just starting industrializing in 1850, they were about 13.3, so about 1/3. By the 1870s, Britain produced 50% of the world's steel, owned 1/3 of the world's shipping, and half of the world's railways. All right. The British population between 1800 and 1850 doubled, but its per capita increased 85%. Britain was the world supplier in cotton, woolen goods, cutlery, pots, pans, stoves, grates, railroad train engines, steamships, you name it, right? Britain's leadership role was put on display in the world's first ever World Fair. The Crystal Palace Expedition of 1851 is going to be hosted in England, first ever World Fair, right? Sir Joseph Paxton is going to create a building called the Crystal Palace to house this. This is where it gets its name. This huge prefabricated steel and glass house, right? That was shown as built as a showcase of this British ingenuity and this British industrialization.